How's it going, guys? It's Eclipse here, and today we are going to look at some of the easiest tips that you can use in World of Tanks to get better, or at least perform better in the game, feel like the game is more enjoyable. And of course, these aren't going to necessarily be ones that you have to pay anything for, so you don't have to buy a premium tank in these couple of tips, which is always a bonus. And hopefully we'll see what sort of things you can do straight off the bat when you first load up World of Tanks, and you can do it right now. And these things, when I knew them and learnt them and used them in the game, I suddenly realised how much of a benefit they are, even if you don't initially think that they're going to do a whole lot. So first things first, one of the biggest things that I did straight away when I played World of Tanks, and it is somewhat speculative, you know, you don't always have to use this, but it was to go to the settings page. And there are a few settings that I wanted to showcase to you guys. I have a full settings guide that you can go over, but the biggest thing that I used straight away, and it made me so much better and enabled me to do what I wanted in the game, was to turn off aim assist. And aim assist is one of the things that a lot of people use within the game, and they don't even realize that you can turn it off. And although this is not necessarily a requirement to become a super good player, it is definitely one that I used to be able to pinpoint opponents and not have to be forced to be moved around when you don't want to. And this is something I always use, and instead of using the aim assist, I always use the auto aim to center on an opponent. Now what I mean by this is that when you have aim assist on, essentially what happens is when you're tracking an opponent, or if you're trying to aim at a specific area on an opponent and they start moving left and right, your aim will actually move with them slightly, so it kind of tracks the opponent a little bit. This can be really annoying for if you want to predict where an opponent is going to be in just a second, or if you want to be able to pinpoint a track and suddenly it starts moving slightly to the left, or moving up or to the right, or just in a direction that you don't want. And when you are trying to go for those tracking and damage shots, or if you're trying to go for those weak points, it can actually end up making you miss. So that's why I turned off aim assist. Now when you first do it, you might find that you end up missing a few shots, but you have to give it time, because you'll learn that over time this will make you so much better at being able to deal with certain tanks, especially when you're trying to hit minuscule weak points, things like a Super Pershing for example. When you have to hit the cupola on the top of the vehicle that you can see highlighted in green right at the top, you'll be able to hit that much easier when you don't have aim assist on than when you do, which sounds counterintuitive, but it definitely is a thing. And of course this is one of the big things that I found out when I started playing, and it definitely improved my gameplay. Whether it'll do it to you exactly depends on how you play, and of course if you enjoy using aim assist, then for all means just keep using it. But the other tips aren't going to be as kind of subjective to your own gameplay. These are going to be some interesting ones as well. So heading off into tip number 2, the main thing that I always see in the comments of videos is talking about premium consumables. Now, we all know in World of Tanks, of course, you have to pay extra silver, and you have to pay silver every single game when you do use premium consumables. Whether you actually use the consumable or not, it gets taken off of your battle because of the fact that you've used it, essentially, because they have passive bonuses. So for example, if I just grab up a random game that we've had recently, you can actually see, if we go to the performance result, you'll see that you've done a ton of damage, blah blah blah, but rounds actually cost you money, and of course premium consumables cost you money. But when you are using premium consumables in the best way, and you're starting to deal more damage because you're using them and all of the bonuses that come with them, you will end up doing more damage, which in turn actually makes you, it might double how much silver you've made in a game. And considering the cost of a premium consumable is about 10,000 silver, you can easily make that silver back just from the benefits that you get from it. Now, in terms of premium consumable loadouts, I always recommend that you use Enhanced Ration, since it boosts your commander XP by 10%, which is a nice one, especially when you're first starting the game and you may only have, a 1 or a 2 skill commander. So for example, if I just grab a random one, you might start off with 1 commander skill. The extra 10% is nice, but it isn't the main reason why you take premium consumables in your tank. It is for the extra 10% crew performance. Now, what does this mean? So, for example, as an easy way of actually showing it, let's take off this premium consumable. So if we go to the statistic page of this vehicle, the M26 Pershing, it could be any vehicle, it doesn't matter. You see that the average damage per minute is 2,100. What happens though when we put on the premium consumable in terms of the enhanced rations is then when we go over to the stats page, you'll see it's 2,194. But when you assign a commander to the tank, you'll see that because of the commander perks, it will increase the damage per minute, but you will get a bigger bonus from that damage per minute. So if we go over here, look at the stats page, 2,594. We remove the premium consumable, and then we get back out and then go over and have a look again, 2,462. So we gain an extra 100 damage per minute. That might not seem like a huge amount, but it does add up and it is nice to have in the game, and it allows you to reload quicker. But one of the biggest things is that not only do you, when you use the premium consumable, get a 10% passive boost, so it applies all of the time, but when you use the enhanced rations, you'll get a 15% active boost, and this is essentially when you use it in the game. The 15% crew performance bonus that you get on top allows you to get a total of 25% increased crew performance, which means that not only do you get that 100 boost, but when you activate it, you're going to get a further like 150 damage per minute. So it increases it even more. So you end up with 25% better in all of your crew performance, which doesn't just count for your damage. It counts for your view range. It counts for your repair speed. It counts for your whole rotation speed. If you've got perks that deal with that, it increases or decreases your detectability, so you're hidden more often, or at least can remain undetected easier than you can with, if you're not using it. So it is a super big bonus to your vehicle. And for the most part, people end up swapping this out for fuel, for a fire extinguisher, or maybe using fuel boost, which in my opinion is a big no-no. There are some situations where you use a fire extinguisher in a tank like the FV215B, the British Tier 10 Heavy, but for the most part, I would always recommend using enhanced rations, because this is going to impact every game, and using a fire extinguisher only really affects you in a minute amount of games. And to be honest with you, it is not going to be that much of an impact being able to put out a fire. Yes, you may lose 600 extra health in a game because you got set on fire, but because of the fact you're using rations every game and the bonus is every single game, it has a much better impact for your own gameplay, and it is one of the biggest things that you can use out of the premium consumables. And for the most part, you don't even have to use any other premium consumables. That is the only premium consumable you kind of almost have to do if you want to be competitive. If you use the enhanced repair kit, it just gives you the ability to repair all your modules and be able to use it multiple times in a game, which is beneficial. But if you don't have the silver, it's not a massive deal. But enhanced rations, something you should always pick in your tanks other than in a very few amount of situations, and especially if you're trying to run a camo build or a view range build, or a tank that has super high DPM and you want even more DPM. And even in some of your heavily armored tanks, since you're less likely to get set on fire because of the fact that you're going to be able to bounce rounds, yeah, rations almost a must. So that is one thing of the tips that I wanted to show to you guys. Now the next feature is skills, and I'm not going to go into detail because I have done a skills guide which you can find on the channel in the How to Get Better at World of Tanks series playlist that I have on the channel, and I will link it in the description for you guys so you can have a look at the skills and also equipment as well. But the skills that I would recommend first, because most people are going to be able to get at least 3 skills straight off the bat from the season pass, getting commanders for free from challenges, etc. But these are the things you should always be keeping an eye on straight away out the bat. Now the first one is using 6th Sense, and 6th Sense is one of the biggest things that you can use in the game, which is going to allow you to essentially remain very aware of your situations. So 6th Sense is something you should always use first. Out of all of the perks, this is going to be the biggest impact to your game. It allows you to find out so much within the game, whether you're detected round a corner, which means that there's a tank around the corner, whereas the targeted only tells you when someone is looking at you, aiming at you, and you're probably going to take a hit by the time you can pull back around the corner, whereas Sixth Sense immediately responds and tells you there's someone that spotted you, they can see you, and they're probably going to start aiming towards you, so you can pull back behind the corner, you don't take any damage. Targeted is just a really annoying way of essentially knowing that the enemy team are looking at you, and it doesn't really give you that much knowledge of where you get spotted, because you could have got spotted before you pulled around the corner and you then get targeted as you go around the corner, whereas when you have Sixth Sense you know exactly when you're spotted, and then you can determine where the enemy tanks are in the game, and also you can use it to find out what sort of tanks you're coming up against. If you get spotted and you're in a light tank and you don't spot the opponent, it's probably a super view range vehicle, something like a light tank that sat in a bush somewhere, or it's a TD with very good camo, and so you can pinpoint which tanks are most likely going to be the ones that spot you, and then you can think about that and decide what you want to do against that tank, knowing that it is probably one of, you know, a couple vehicles on the enemy team that could do that. And that is really, really good for knowing what to do next. And it is something that a lot of people blindly think, oh yeah, but it tells me when I'm targeted and when someone's looking at me. It's just not the same, and a good player will make use of this and be able to do so much more than if you don't use it, and it's simply because of the fact that it gives you so much information that you can go off within your game. Now the next one, and the second one I always pick, is indeed Born Leader. This is one of the biggest cruise skills that you can use. It is a 10% increase to skill effectiveness, and that essentially works same as what you see with effectively your Pershing. When we had the enhanced rations, it gives you a 10% crew bonus, but it also gives you a 10% skill effectiveness. So when you're using your commander and you've got more perks, so it becomes more useful as you increase the amount of perks that you get. If you've got a 9 skill commander, it's better. But for example, the skill effectiveness, if for example I pick rapid loading, which is the third perk I pretty much always use, unless for example I'm using a light tank, it gives you that extra damage per minute. When I'm using Born Leader in conjunction with rapid loading, I get a 10% bonus to every perk's bonus. So in theory, what I have is a 10% bonus to my gun reload speed. Because I have Born Leader, I get 10% of 10% bonus added on. So that means I get 1% extra bonus, which means overall I've got an 11% bonus to reload speed. So Born Leader, if you imagine, if you had 9 skill perks, or if you had an extra 5 skill perks, you would not only get the 1% increase from rapid loading, but you get a 10% bonus on all of the other perks. So if they all were 10% bonuses, you would end up with, 6% better in all of your kind of different regions of the tank. So it works in that way, and it gives you that crew performance as well, which gives you that 10% bonus in addition to the perk bonus. So it's really, really good, and a lot of people forget how good this actually is, and it isn't the most clear thing within the game. So I wanted to highlight that to you guys. And then the third one, obviously if you're using the majority of tanks, I would recommend rapid loading. It's just a 10% increase to your reload speed, which means you don't have to wait as long to fire your next shell. Or if you are playing a light tank or a tank that has terrible accuracy, I would recommend using steady aim, which is a 10% bonus to all accuracy within the game. You're just going to be more accurate by 10%. Or I would use the view range perk if I am playing in a light tank and I am simply just wanting to make my tank better. So those are the kind of first 3 perks that I would use. The first 2 are just genuinely the first 2 I would always pick. And then the third is kind of dependent. The majority of cases I'll use rapid loading, and then dependent on the actual tank in question, I would use either steady aim for tanks with terrible accuracy, and view range, which comes in the form of situational awareness if I'm playing in a light tank. And then, of course, you can build off of that dependent on what tank you're playing. So if you want a full in-depth guide on crew skills and what sort of things for each different type of tank, then highly recommend checking out the crew skills guide that I have on the channel. So as the 4th tip in this video, it is more of a theoretical tip, and it's something that I highly recommend anyone who is trying to get better at the game does, and it is actually that you don't want to be swapping around classes all of the time. And what I mean by that is, for example, if you're playing in the tank line leading up to the E4, I wouldn't recommend then suddenly jumping into the Sheridan line where you're playing light tanks, because what happens is you don't really get to learn the playstyle of one specific tank. So you want to make sure that you are playing similar sorts of tanks. So if I'm playing the E4, although it is a tank destroyer, it's a heavily armoured tank destroyer that has good alpha. What other tanks have that sort of attributes? Well, an E100 has that sort of attributes. It has a turret, it has good armour, it has high alpha. So if I was going to play another tank and learn how to play those sorts of specific tanks in World of Tanks, I would be playing the E4, the E100. You can look at some of the other vehicles in the game that have good turrets and of course good armor, but also higher alpha to be able to make your decision. I wouldn't jump around all of the different classes playing light tanks, then playing a completely different medium tank, then playing a heavy tank, and then playing a light tank again. And then you end up kind of going through and you never really get to master any of them. So I'd focus down, get one class really good so that you know how to play them, how to come up against them, because of course as you learn to play them you know their weaknesses and you can use that yourself. So when you see them in the game played by someone that hasn't focused, you can do really well against them and you can definitely improve much more. And that doesn't mean you have to play the E4. That was just an example. I'm saying that if you play any sort of vehicle, pick the one type of vehicle that you want to play, and then you decide to pick a couple of tank lines that you can grind towards that are similar, and then you can really start learning the game. And as like an additional tip to this, my kind of key recommendations for tank lines, if you're a newer player or someone that is wanting to really get better at the game, tank lines that are really good for that is the E5. You've also got tank lines like the IS-4. Although this tank line in the early stages feels a little bit annoying, when you get the tier 9 and the tier 10, you can start learning a lot, as well as things like the Object 277 line, really nice ones to begin with, along with the E100 line as well, because they have, they're not necessarily too difficult to get a hang of the armor, and they also provide you with good damage per minute, and they're quite rewarding to actually play, and they're quite good comparatively to some of the other tanks at the tier, and as like an indication. Tanks I wouldn't be recommending are super heavies. You typically get kind of bogged down in the performance issues where, you know, you just end up having terrible games because you're too slow. So that's kind of my additional tips. Just pick a very solid tank that you're able to learn from. Even an E50M is a very good example of a good beginner tank, or even if you are a advanced player or an experienced player trying to really pinpoint down your next level of trying to win in the game, then that is what I'd recommend. So that was tip number 4, but let's move over into tip number 5. And tip number 5 is kind of a more overall idea of how you can play in the game based on the tank that you pick, because although you might think, oh, well, I know how spotting mechanics work, you might not know how exactly they work for the tank that you pick, which is why you should always know about the vehicle that you're playing, the typical ways that you can use that vehicle to deal more damage, get more spotting, be able to survive longer, and it all comes down to understanding the tank that you're playing. So, for an example, to put it really bluntly, the Chrysler K here. Right, what is this tank? So when I first look at this tank, and when you might first look at the tank, might be completely different. And what I'm trying to say is I look at this tank and I go, right, what are the benefits of the Chrysler K? So the first thing that I look at is, does it have armor as a heavy tank? We go straight into the statistics of the vehicle, go over to the armor viewer. What does the armor look like? Right, so it's got good frontal upper plate, looks like it can bounce a few rounds, potentially. Obviously premium rounds exist in the game, which can pen you in this thing, which I already know about. But when you first look at the tank, you want to be looking at these sorts of things. The lower plate looks actually pretty decent, 184mm, it's slightly angled, and in fact is more heavily armoured than the upper plate, which means it looks like you can bounce a few rounds. So in my opinion, because it's quite flat, you should be angling in this vehicle. The side armour of the tank looks pretty good, so looks like it could be a side scraper. It's got a rear mounted turret, looks like we could poke out from behind a building, deal our damage, and then get back behind cover, and then hopefully just expose the side where they can't pen you because it's so well angled. So that is my initial impression of the armour. What else do we look at? Well, we look at the damage. This tank has 320 damage. For example, this is actually quite a low amount of damage for a heavy tank at tier 8, comparatively to some of the other vehicles that you could play. So in contrast, the T-34 here has 400 alpha. What is the benefits of having lower alpha? Well, typically it's the reload speed, so you're faster at being able to reload and you often have better accuracy. So what does that mean? Well, essentially you're going to have to poke a lot more with this tank, which is why you want to know how the armour works, because you're going to have to use the gun more times to get the same amount of damage than in a T-34. So what you want to do is make sure that you understand that I've got to poke a lot more. I need to be really focusing on pinpointing out tanks in the game to be able to deal multiple shots where they're only able to do one, and I might actually be able to fire twice for when they fire once, which is really, really good. And subsequently, if for example you are playing the T-34, which has pretty mediocre reload speed, 11 seconds, you need to know that when you pull around that corner you don't get hit. So you need to be looking at the enemy tanks. When do they fire? When they fired, you pull around the corner, you deal your shot of damage and you pull back. That way you can use the high alpha without taking any shots in return, and those trades that you're going to be making, and trading by the way is where essentially, you know, how much damage have I dealt to an opponent versus how much damage have they done to me. The better of a trade means you've done more damage compared to they've done to you. So if I do 400 damage, they do 0 damage, that is a perfect trade. I've not lost any health. It's amazing. If you can do that multiple times in a game, you are going to be able to be much, much better. So that's my ideology with regards to the damage, with regards to the armor. You also need to be thinking about the view range, and view range, it says literally on your screen, 435 meters vision range in the T-34. But the other statistics you want to be having a look at is the still concealment. So you'll see that there's not much of a difference between my maximum view range and my still concealment, which means in a tank like this, I'm going to be getting spotted probably more often than I'm going to spot an opponent. So what do I need to do? How can I limit the effect of that within a game? Well, if you're in a tank like this that can't really spot for itself, you want to be making sure that you have at least some teammates who are going to be able to spot for you. Or you limit the opponent's view range by putting obstacles in between you and the opponents. So you want to be making sure you're going into somewhere like a city where you can stop opponents from seeing you in the game. And what I'm going to do in the future on this channel is start uploading some videos where I'm going to pinpoint specific items that are going to be able to use yourself, and hopefully you'll learn in specific how you can do it in the gameplay. So I'll pick apart these sorts of things so you will know how to use these tactics in particular in the gameplay. But these are things that you will want to know initially before you can even start thinking about how you can do it in the game, because if you don't know that your tank can even do it, then you are not going to be able to use the gameplay tips to be able to actually perform within the game. So that is one thing that you should always be looking at. And I'm not talking about going into the nth degree of being like, well, if I optimize my, damage per minute so I get 0.387549 accuracy, I'm going to be able to be much better than 0.349587. It's not that hard. It's just a case of looking at your tank's strengths, understanding the weaknesses, and then using that to predict where you're going to go at the beginning of a game, the sort of things you need to be thinking about in the middle of the game, and then being able to preserve the hit points for the late game where you can deal even more damage or get more spotting or move around the map better. So these are all things that you should be thinking about, and it isn't limited to just the vision. It's the same thing with hit points. If you've got low hit points, what does that mean? Try not to get hit at the beginning of the game because you're going to need them in the late game. What does max speed? If you're slow, you want to be making sure that you are aggressive in the beginning of the game so that you don't miss out on the action when it comes to either your team steamroll the opponents or the enemy team steamroll you and you're still sat in spawn and you can't move, and then you end up doing no damage. So a lot of the times movement is a big thing within World of Tanks. So we're going to cover all of that in the upcoming videos on the channel, but these are some of the things that I really pinpointed down when I first started playing World of Tanks, and it enabled me to get up to the win rate that you see here, 61%, and often in the most recent tanks I'm playing, I'm looking at about 64 to 70% dependent on what tanks I've played, and most of the tanks that I play now are usually between tiers 8 and 10. I don't usually play lower tiers, and if I do, it's usually higher win rate because you're playing up against players that don't have all of the advantages that I'm trying to show to you today. So hopefully this video comes in at least useful, and even if you get a little bit out of it, it would have been 100% worth it for me and hopefully for you. So if you have enjoyed this video, like the video, make sure to comment so I know that you did enjoy it and you want to see more. Otherwise I will just continue with the gameplay and tank reviews. And yeah, let me know in the comment section down below, like it if you did, and I will see you in the next video. Don't forget to check out the How to Get Better at World of Tanks playlist on screen right now, which will teach you extra things including the crew skills, equipment and some of the other extra gameplay tips, and I hope I see you there. Goodbye.